Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to everyone in the community. This is the OpenNTF webinar for June 2025, and our topic today is in the development world, titled Engage Super Pro Code Mode, Web Apps Without Frameworks. Our presenters are two very well-known members of the community, former OpenNTF board member Paul Withers and Stephan Wissel, former of IBM, and both with HCL now. We'll get through a couple of quick notes here and then get into the presentation. Of course, OpenNTF happens because we have support from the community. And so just a quick thank you to both HCL and Prominic for their support to make things like this webinar happen. And again, just a reminder that everybody that is a participant, whether you're watching a webinar or on Discord or asking questions, you're all part of the community. We are all part of the community, and therefore we're all OpenNTF, and always looking to answer questions and share what we know and help each other out. So by all means, if you have a question or something that you'd like to share and don't know how to do that, you can get in touch with us and we can connect you up with the right people and either get your problem solved or give you a means of being able to share what you know with the community. A couple of quick notes. Domino 14.5 launched earlier this week, and we wanted to just say a quick thank you and congratulations to the team at HCL, because while it may not look like it unless you're involved, there was a huge effort in putting Domino 14.5 out to market, and so just a great kudos and congratulations to everyone at HCL for all their hard work. And with the launch of Domino 14.5, we have reached the date, I think it's next, I forget, Wednesday, where Domino 11 is no longer in support. So I just included a link to the knowledge base article that provides the details on that for anybody that's running Domino 11 or earlier. Just be worth knowing that Domino 11 is no longer a supported piece of software unless you pay for extended support, and those details are in that document. Quick note about upcoming events in the community. Next week in Vienna, DNUG is having their annual conference. And then next Thursday, we have our next iteration of the Open Mic with the HCL developers. This time it's going to be select members of the HCL team that were involved in bringing 14.5, Domino 14.5 to market. And we'll have more details posted up on our webinars page, but you can register there already for it. We will also be having our annual general meeting in July. The date is July 10th. There'll be more details for that posted in a blog post shortly. And then our next webinar is going to be a customer-presented webinar, speeding up business process execution by event-driven notifications in Domino apps. That's going to be Vern de Gever and his team on July 17th. And just announced today, Let's Connect Nordics has scheduled their next meetings, going to be in October. They've launched a new website, and we want to be able to support everybody in the community that's having events. So by all means, if you know of an event that's coming up or are an event organizer, even if it's a small one, let us know and we'll announce it and make sure that people know where they can go to in order to get in touch and join. Quick note about Discord. I mentioned it earlier. This is the place where we are interacting online. If you haven't registered, please go and do so. It's the place to ask your questions and answer questions and find out what's going on in the community. And the last question here, or the first question, is always, is this going to be recorded? Yes, it is. Please do ask your questions as we go along through the presentation. As is normally the case, we'll save those questions for the end of the presentation where we can ask and have them answered during the recording so that then they can be available on YouTube after the fact. Please use the questions panel in GoTo and we will get to your questions after the presentation. And with that, I will switch over.
So this is a bit of a consolidation of two sessions that Stephan and I have done. Last year at Engage and this year at Engage. So we're going to cover everything and squish it into an even tighter time frame. So we're going to look at the current landscape, look at how web development has evolved, and help get knowledge on deciding on a framework or not using a framework at all. So this is quite deep dive. So our hosts, this is just a word cloud of the stuff that I work on and develop. It's not just Domino. I have done some traditional Domino web, but it's gone through various frameworks, various languages, basically whatever I need, and learning on the job and learning what to use in which scenario, really, and picking the right thing for the current project. Over to you, Stephan.
Yeah, what you haven't seen on Paul's word cloud is COBOL. This is what I used to start in IT with, because there were no spreadsheets, and going to business school meant learning COBOL. My most claim to fame is that I designed and invented and supervised the creation of the Domino REST API. And there's a very simple things. Everything that's really, really good, kudos to my team. Everything that you don't like and doesn't work, it's my fault. I'm doing nodes since version 2.1, and I'm gonna do it until version 20. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks. So there's going to be a lot in here. There's a lot of demos. There's lots of slides and demos that are available. We're not going to cover all the slides here, but there is a GitHub repo, so you will be able to dig into that and have a play about with it and learn more stuff. So, Stephan, back to you.
So one of the interesting things is one of my favorite quotes from Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince, is you achieve perfection only not if there's nothing more to add, but if there's nothing more to take away. Slide down. And when it comes to web development, there's a very fundamental principle that gets swished away very often when you get started coding, that you have a web application has structure, layout, and behavior, and there are tools for that. Skip down. And layout is done using CSS, and Paul will share a great deal how far CSS came in these days. For structure HTML and behavior JavaScript. The very moment you think, oh, I do everything in JavaScript, I'm not blaming any framework, especially not React, you enter a world of pain that you can avoid if you keep this structure in mind. Okay, Paul, back to you.
Right, so a bit of history. So early on, the focus was just browsers, and Netscape Navigator added CSS in. CSS didn't exist before that. I think one of the browsers, and it's further in slides later, tried to do CSS with JavaScript, but it wasn't very successful. And then we started getting JavaScript libraries trying to handle a lot of things, and Dojo started adding in widgets into that JavaScript area as well. And then you started getting JavaScript frameworks, and now we've got the next gen of JavaScript frameworks. But the key here is that if you look at the browsers, and we haven't got all of them here, but Firefox, Chrome, Edge, Safari, they're all now in continuous development. So you get prompted that there's a new version available, you click a button to reload it, and it pulls it down. Similarly, if we look at CSS, we've got version 3 here, but really it's in constant development. We'll talk about something called baseline later on, but it's constantly being evolved. And you look at the JavaScript as well, again, that's constantly being evolved, which means that a lot of things that jQuery was used for, it's not needed anymore. So that's a key bit there. But basically, the history of web development over the last 30 years really comes down to Internet Explorer finally died, browsers updated, JavaScript and CSS evolved, and HTML component extensibility, which has been there for absolutely ages, started to become really cool. If you want to dig in, there's more slides down from here on the history of everything, but we'll jump across to starting to get started. Over to you, Stephan.
Yeah. So one of the things we hear sometimes, oh, I need to do web development. Do I need to learn? And then insert your favorite framework. But what I think is, and then arrow down, is you need some foundational skills in basic JavaScript. Once you learn that, then it becomes much easier and clearer to pick the tools of your choice. If you only know jQuery, if you only know React, if you only know Angular, you're missing out. Especially the data structures and algorithms are transcend languages, and if JavaScript is the language you use, then you learn them together with JavaScript. Down. One of my favorite books is Structures in the Interpretation of Computer Programs, which was, I think, is 40 years old. It was originally written in Algol, and they translated it to JavaScript. Worth every penny to look at it, to learn about the fundamental of programming and algorithms and trees and all the likes. With that one, I think we should get started with examples, Paul.
Yep. So we're going to be showing quite a bit of code here. So pay attention to it. First, we're going to cover off with layout with Bootstrap and the less proprietary ways of doing it. Data retrieval, then components. Stephan's going to talk about React.js and web components. Then we're going to be looking at some of the stuff that's been added into CSS, particularly over the last few years. Stephan's going to talk about CSP, and I'm sure that, well, that's become a bigger topic more recently. And then we're going to look at some advanced functionality and features. So, on to layout. So, Bootstrap has been a standard for layout over the last 15 years, and really the Bootstrap has become so popular that jQuery is the standard JavaScript library now, because Bootstrap covers the layout, jQuery handles the JavaScript side of it. So let's have a look at some of the things with Bootstrap. So everyone knows the Bootstrap website. Bootstrap, you pull in a style sheet, but it's not just a style sheet. You need to pull in a JavaScript library as well, and remember, if you're pulling in stuff, then to add the integrity to make sure that there's not any man-in-the-middle manipulation. But Bootstrap is basically 12-column layout. So you specify your rows, you specify your columns, and you can add a style in it using a class then to define responsiveness, how whether it's 6 columns on a medium layout or a large layout, and handle then accordingly to get the responsiveness for it. And form layout is just then rows and columns. So again, it's your kind of 12-column layout, so you're handling the layout of all of that. but and it allows something like this with pretty standard layout. But there's a lot that can be done now without diving into Bootstrap and forcing yourself down a 12-column layout because all you know is 12 columns. CSS Flexbox has been around for quite some time, and CSS Tricks has a very useful, handy guide for getting to know all the various options there and learning them. I would highly recommend CSS Tricks. Their cheat sheets are extremely useful for the CSS stuff. And MDN, not surprisingly, also has an article covering everything there. So let's get into actually looking at some. So here, you define on the class the display property as flex, and something that we'll see more and more here. You've got this little icon next to it, which if you click it, you can change, say, the direction and test them around. So you can try and play about with different options. The alignment and the justification of elements as well. We'll come on to that a little bit later. And then you specify a flex grow. Now, I'm using 633 here just because that adds up to 12. And if you're used to Bootstrap, then you're used to a 12-column layout. That could just as easily be 2, 1, and 1. It could be 4, 2, and 2. They're just relative to one another. What you base those on is up to you. So you're no longer limited to that kind of 12-column layout. Form, again, then you've got the form itself, which is display flex, and the flex flow there is row and wrap. So we've got 2 columns here, and once we get more, it'll just wrap onto the next row. And the columns again then are flex, but the flex direction here is column. So the entries within this flex, and we can highlight it there, these entries are organized as columns. On this one, on the form, they're organized as rows. So you, rather than specifying row or column, you handle that with the flow option. You can also do responsive. So here we've got one that's responsive. Now, responsive is done here with media queries. So as I bring this down, and this is that responsive flex row, then you'll see that I've got a media query with a max width of 800 pixels that's then changing the flex direction to column. Once I come back out, then it's just the default of row. So you can handle that way. That's one way of handling responsive. We'll see others later on as well. You can also do menus. So here we've got a drop down with various options here and various links. This is just HTML and CSS. If we expand out the head, there is no JavaScript in here. In Bootstrap, this is done with JavaScript. We don't need any JavaScript here. The way this is done is that on the drop down, on hover, we're setting the drop down content to display block. Otherwise, it's display none. So drop down content, the default there is display none. as we hover onto it, it's display block. So we then get drop-down menus in there as well. We can also make it responsive as well. As I come down, then we'll see that it changes to be just a single column as well. That's being handled, if I come back out, by, again, a media query. Normally, they are float left. Once we get below 600 pixels, then they're float none. Maybe a little bit more work, but there's no JavaScript here. There's no other libraries. It's just a little bit of CSS. So Flexbox allows you to order elements and then just wrap them onto the next row or column. But if you're going to want multi-dimensional stuff, then you're going to need CSS grid. And let me just run onto the slides for that here. The other key thing here is that Bootstrap is built on Flexbox. So if you're using Bootstrap, you're just using a layer on top of Flexbox. So you're already including Flexbox. You're just using a custom syntax on top of it. Those of us who've been around for a while with Xpages, we're used to that kind of grid layout with the application layout control, and that was originally done with custom controls, and we're used to a similar kind of layout with forms where you specify rows and columns and add them in. CSS grid handles multi-dimensional, and again, there's a very useful CSS tricks cheat sheet there, but browser developer tools help with that as well. So what you can use CSS grid to create an application layout, which is what we've got here. So here, instead of display flex, you do display grid. You set a grid template columns and a grid template rows. Now, auto is just going to mean it's going to take up as much space as it needs. You can set it to a particular pixel height, but you can also use FR. So FR is a fraction of it. So think of this a bit like the flex grow. So the flex grow, we had 633. Here we've got 1FR, 5FR, 1FR. So the first column is one fraction of it. The middle one is 5, so it's 5 times as wide as the first one, and the last one is 1. And this is then, it just automatically manipulates to fill the space. We're also setting a view height here, which means that auto, the top row for the header takes up as much space as it needs. The bottom row for the footer takes up as much space as it needs, and the middle one takes up whatever is remaining. So I can change that and it just picks up. And that's based upon this height. So 95 VH, 95% of the viewport height. So if you're on a smaller device, that's going to just take up the size relative to that screen. So you can pull into account the device that you're using as well there. Gap is, we'll see that if I click on the grid. So here you can see the areas and you can see the gap. So gap is the row gap and the column gap. So the gap between rows and columns as 5 pixels. We're then also using semantic labeling here. So we're using header nav, main, aside, and footer. These are basically divs, but as HTML elements, they give a bit more meaning, which is helpful then for accessibility. Organizing the layout, we can set the grid column start and grid column end, or we can do grid column and numbers. You can also use negative numbers. So -1 is the rightmost column. That means that if you change it to have more columns later on, you don't need to mess about with that. There's also another way of handling the layout, and if I switch across to container areas, you can, rather than specifying the layout on each particular child, you can use grid template areas, and this is a multi-line set of strings. Each string is one line, and you specify a template area variable. So here, header, header, header. So the first row, which has 3 columns, they're all header. Bottom row, they're all footer. Middle one, they're left, content, and right. Notice they're left, it's left, content, and right there. If I come down to here, the grid area is left. It's not using the HTML, it's using the grid area label in order to work out which one to place. And we can also do a tabular layout here, and this is where it's going to be useful to start seeing the options here. So justify option stretch means it will stretch to take up as much space as it needs. Flex start means that the items will align at the start. If I change that justify content to justify items it is to start, then the input boxes take up as much space as they are told to take up. So it's just a normal size for an input there. If I change that to stretch, then they take up the remaining space. Align items, if I at the moment they're flex start. If I put them to flex center and you look at the location and the flag year built in size, then you'll see that they are centered relative to the height of the largest column. So you can get some useful layouts there with that. The grid template columns here, I'm not using a fixed option here. I'm using repeat, auto fit, min max. So the min max, the minimum is 500 pixels, maximum is 1 FR. So that makes it automatically responsive. So as this gets down to under 1,000 pixels plus the gap, then it automatically reorders. And if I go with a very big screen, then I get 3 columns there. It makes it automatically responsive. Auto fit means that if I had an odd number of columns, which is what I get when I go there, it fills columns, it fits columns in where there aren't any. Auto fill will mean that this bottom column would go across the whole width. So there's lots of flexibility that you can do. Really dig into that cheat sheet for more on that, on the complete guide grid. But you've got a lot of tooling here to play around with the various options. So, Stephan, on to data retrieval.
No application is an island, and usually we need to fetch data from a backend, and we're gonna have a quick look how to do that. Where's my mouse cursor? There we go. And what we're gonna go, the examples you find is Axios Axios in a browser, fetch, and then my favorite example, the slow serve. Well, I say you could call it a slow cooker. So a little bit of the history of fetching data. The whole thing starts courtesy to Internet Explorer in 1997. It was then called AJAX, the XML HTTP request, but it only took off in the 2000s and 2004 when 2005 when it got a name. It became standard in 2006, but it took quite a while until it was really comfortable. Ajax in frameworks, I say the most dominant one is Axios and jQuery, and the heydays of Dojo are kind of over. And what I strongly recommend is that you want to have a dedicated tool where you can first check your whether you can retrieve the data. I used to be a fan of Postman. I'm now more in favor of Bruno, but that's a story for another time. And when you look at it, like say, the calls are pretty much similar. Like say, there is Axios request for Axios and $Ajax. The question is, do I really need all of this? So when I said, okay, I don't have a framework, let's have a look at the fetch. Where is it? There. I have the buttons here. They all do the same thing. They fetch data from a backend. I say I start Axios here. It records the time. So you see it's shortly before midnight here in Manila. And after about 10 seconds, you will get the result. You do the same thing with fetch. It will take the same amount of time, so I spare you that 10 seconds. But the more interesting thing is I can go and use a chunk method. I'm going to show you that in a second. And you see, I straight away can go and interact with that while the loading process is still ongoing. So that makes a very good user experience when you said, okay, should I show just 20 records? The user is going to click on get more, or I load them all in one go. And then you can do that using chunk. Let's try that the same with Axios. And sorry, Dave, I can't do that. Axios can't handle chunk responses. So by moving to the standard, you get all the progress and improvements that happen to the browsers over time and to the JavaScript language of free house and don't depend on the framework. The fetching of the chunk responses is a little bit different from what you're used to in using simply fetch or Axios. So you first fetch a data URL, so your backend server. Then the question is, what does come back? It's not a stream of data. It's not a string. It's a stream of data. And I said, okay, I want to have the body. So the perception is the body is again a string. No, it's a stream. And then you use the pipe through, which is a part of the core DOM capabilities, to turn it into text. Then chop it into pieces because it's JSON data what's coming there. Pass it, and then finally at the very end, JSON to table row. You add one element after the other to a UI, which then opens up, gives you the design freedom. And I say, should I go and have a page design? Should I go and have the whole shebang? I say, maybe there are 500 documents. Since the user doesn't have to wait to look at them, you have more capabilities. And on to components. So the fun part is when we look at components, there is you will find in our repository 3 implementations, one in React.js using Redux, one in React.js using Zustand, which always cracks me up when I hear my English-speaking friends trying to pronounce the German word Zustand or something like this, and then is a native web component. And what's quite interesting is the journey. Like say you ask somebody, I need a web application, oh, React. And we're going to walk through the steps that are necessary to actually build this, and then you have a look at the how it differs in functionality. You don't need to understand everything, just the big takeaway, it's a lot more work using a framework. So little punch towards Meta, formerly known as Facebook. I have a lot of respect for the engineers. They do good work, but the company was founded to body shame students, so I'm a little worried using their tools. And okay, the big difference in the React application, so you have a little bit of HTML and then everything is in JavaScript. Makes awfully lot of sense when you look at the Facebook culture, which is very engineering driven. They have brilliant minds which breathe JS. They can recite JS functions in the morning when before they even had coffee, but that might not be the right approach for you when you come from a different development background. One of the big things which I personally call Frankencode is JSX. That is a JavaScript function that returns you a HTML element. So you have HTML inside JavaScript, which is a nightmare if you have a designer, and I have a very brilliant one just sitting next to me. Because they suddenly need to learn JavaScript as well. So how do I get started? So I use npx, create a React application, then do npm install and then npm start. And there the pro tip, this is linkable when you check it. There are Redux development tools that make your life easier. And then I said, I need to have a package, I need to have testing and React DOM and React Script and React Redux, and I have a bunch of scripts and ESLint configuration end. And then I go on and said, okay, I need state management. So what does that mean? The React renders components top down in one direction, which makes technically a lot of sense. So you don't get a confusion what is what, but it doesn't manage state. You need to do this externally. And as I said, there's 2 examples we provide. One is using Redux and one is using Zustand. And you have to set this up so to keep the state in JavaScript. So, and then you have the starter code, and you see this is all what the almost HTML looks like, but you already see here root render. This is already your angle brackets inside JavaScript. Then you have the initial application, and then the next piece is the rating. So what I'm going to show you is a small little rating star. No? So you use Uber or DoorDash 1 to 5 stars. I said, okay, I have a demo rating, and it's basically a function. So, and then the next thing is I need the render stars, and there you see I have a for function and a return statement, and in between sprinkled a little bit of HTML. And then the big thing is, okay, I return the div with my render stars. Then I need to create a component, and it needs to use a selector and a dispatch, and it has a class rate, and it has a rating title. And then I need to update my state. So in my click, I need to handle that. And then finally add it to the page where I said, okay, I have my demo new rating. So, and if I don't want to use a framework, I'm going to go and use web components. Web components are W3 standard, and you don't have to subscribe yourself or hand yourself over to the React way to do things. I tried just out of curiosity to mix web standard JavaScript code and React code, and that simply doesn't work. In web components, you have this freedom to do. So how does a browser distinguish between a standard HTML element like div or h1 or h2 and a custom element? Is simply there needs to be a dash in the name. And the interesting thing is a web component owns their properties and attributes. So instead of maintaining state externally somewhere in JavaScript, you maintain the state of a component in their properties and attributes. So there is a bit of a life cycle there. There is a constructor. There is a connected callback. This is once it's rendered in the browser, and then there is an attribute change callback when something changes, like say clicking it on the icon to change a value. And then this is basically more or less the whole constructor code that you need to write. As I said, you can see the source code in the repository, and then the connected callback says, okay, I've been connected. I render this. I add an event listener, and I'm done. So let's and this one is I have a change callback when I externally change names. So let's have a look. Okay, and then I use my own event when the score changes. And then that's how it gets into the HTML. Demo rating, I give it an ID, I give it a score, and I give it the number of stars. Very clean, easy to understand how what this component is doing. So let's have a look. So this is the thing in React. I said, okay, I want to create an additional rating. What do I own? The music. And I said music is free, and I said show rating values. Said 3 out of 5, 3 out of 5, just to make sure that it's correct. 5 out of 5. Set all rating to max. Set all rating to 0. Set rating size, so you can make it bigger, smaller. Extend rating by 1 star, and listen to rating changes. So it now has an event listener. When I go and click, said, okay, rating changed. So, and then clear all ratings. And I got a runtime error. But that's the demo effect. So the same thing in a web component demo, which has substantially less code. I said, same thing, music. Okay, my typo is not that good. Set the rating size, extend the rating by star, listen to change, same thing. So I can go and easily achieve the same result with way less effort. When I inspect the content and look at my elements, I just have let's say the demo rating in here, and that one footer and main is already standard HTML, and then this. I do the same thing in the React application. I have I don't, so I have a dialog and then a form method, and this is way messier than the web component version. So, and you see rating changes different. Let's say React, as I said, is JavaScript or TypeScript centric, where in the web component you don't need to have any compiler or framework. There are a few around that makes it easier. It definitely React.js, you need a build step. The web component is optional. I usually use a build tool, but that's just because I'm lazy and it's convenient. But for testing, you don't need to run the build step. And the big difference is React knows that it's a React component because the component starts with a capital letter, and the web component simply has a dash in its name. Then web components can be used in React, can be used in Angular, can be used in Svelte, whatever. And you're free to pick your state management, whether you want to use JavaScript or whether you want to put it in the DOM. And React components are not DOM accessible. So any skill you have in standard JavaScript is useless, while web components react to the same selectors like get element by ID or query selector as your standard HTML components, which also allows you to progressively enhance your user interface by introducing web components to replace standard HTML elements. And the third one is, as I said, React is JavaScript as the application, while on the web component, it's the document, the DOM that is actually the application. So there's the difference here in the image. You see, like say, the browser DOM is what you see. The virtual DOM is what gets generated by React, and then the application manipulates an element, and then if the virtual DOM realizes it's out of sync with the browser DOM, it updates it. So engineering-wise, an ingenious piece. If you doom scroll on 10,000 articles in Facebook, you need this type of architecture because otherwise your application doesn't perform. But when you just want to have a few forms displayed or a table with a few hundred elements, it might be slightly overkill. And the browser DOM is much leaner. There is no such thing as a virtual DOM behind it. Okay, and you see the difference 4 of 3. That's on one off by 1 error. That's very popular. And the React.js application added 1,500 packages, where 262 packages were looking for funding. The web component doesn't have that for you. And these were all these nice little warnings and all that. Okay, web component choices. This is where it gets a little messy. I looked at webcomponents.org. There are 64 options, like say, how to create web components, which can be quite confusing. But let's say, on the other hand, you have options. The interesting thing is, I say, I got to know web components while I was working in Salesforce. They have the LWC, their own ones. There is Stencil, there is Solid, there's Svelte, so that can make sure that your web components are compliant and fast. And little shout out, there is in the making a component library called WebAwesome. They came from the people that created FontAwesome, the ingenious icon library. They're currently in alpha state. They're definitely worth a look. With that one, I hand over back to Paul for CSS. Good.
Okay, that little star web component may look a bit familiar if you've been using the developer community. I borrowed Stephan's expertise there, or borrowed his example, and integrated that into the developer community for ratings. Interestingly, the developer community discourse is based on EmberJS, which has its own component framework. Obviously, then as you're integrating web components into another framework that has components, there are some differences. The EmberJS framework for components allows access to a lot of the services and things of the whole of the EmberJS application as well, which are then not available in the web components. You just have a JavaScript item, but you can do some interesting things by passing events up and down. And if you want to know more about web components, basically after last year's presentation, I took an XPages application that I have for personal use, and I converted it to JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So here in the Domino tips area, there's a link off to the whole blog series and the GitHub repo for that app. So on to CSS. So we've got even more CSS goodies in addition to Flexbox and CSS Grid here. Some are newer than others. So first up, we've got CSS variables. Now this allows you to avoid hard coding stuff. You can have the variable referenced once and reuse them throughout the whole application. Light dark is one that I almost accidentally used in my own application and didn't realize that it had only been baselined since May of last year. I was building it in the summer of last year, but it allows you to do light and dark mode without needing media queries and without using any framework way of handling it. Various frameworks have their own ways of doing light and dark mode, but this is just standard. And there are lots of CSS functions. We've seen the repeat option and the min-max option in the CSS grid. You can also manipulate colors, as we'll see shortly, and that makes things much easier. It allows you to change colors in various places and not have to mess about with everything. And there's various selectors and pseudo classes, including user valid and user invalid, as opposed to valid and invalid. User valid and user invalid are both fairly new there. CSS has properties. This is a bit like a CSS variable, but you specify the syntax for it, whether child elements inherit it, and an initial value. And based upon the syntax option, it will validate the initial value and it will validate the values that are put elsewhere. So it's very powerful, and the browser highlights when you've got an invalid value in there. It highlights it and allows you to see what you've done wrong. Container queries, a bit like media queries, but more powerful. It allows you to set styling based upon whether a particular element has a particular container name. and this is a really powerful, useful piece of functionality here. I'll come back to that in a moment. So here's our page, and if we look at the style sheet here, we can see that on the root, using the colon root selector, this means that for the whole of the page, set the color scheme to light dark. This is how you do the light dark bit. You set the color scheme, and on the elements you do light dark as a light color and a dark color. Seeing this is a bit fiddly. You have to, it picks up based upon the OS light or dark theme, but you can, if you enable the rendering option, the rendering tab in Chrome, then you can emulate dark mode and light mode and switch between them. So that allows you to see how they're working very easily. We've got a property here for this border radius. There we're setting the initial value to 5 pixels. I can't remember whether it'll let me change it on here. No, let me. So we'll just go and change that border radius there and refresh it. So we'll change that border radius to 15 pixels and reload the page. And now you see that the border radius for all of those elements is automatically updated. If I set it to something that's not a valid value, like 15 EM, then you can see ignored property rule. So it's telling me that it's ignoring that because I've got an invalid value. So if I set it back to 5 pixels, then that's then applying that. So that allows you to set values once and apply them throughout. We've also got the colors here. So here I'm setting the warning border here to, I'm basically manipulating the color for the background in here. So I'm taking from that div warning, I'm using hue, saturation and lightness, and I'm using the hue from this warning, using the saturation and taking the lightness and bringing it down 20. So I'm making it a bit darker. You can do a similar kind of thing with OKLCH, and then the lightness is the first element, and instead of taking off a percentage out of 100, you multiply it by 0.8, for example. What that means is that if I come in and just swap out the warning, so I'm now making that warning this this color here. If I just refresh that, then you see it's an orange and a darker orange border. I haven't had to mess about with the border at all. If I switch it back, then it will become much more apparent that this is a red color here. So you can manipulate colors based upon other colors, and it makes it easier to theme things as a result. In the form here, I'm using border color as border validation, which is again one of the properties here that I'm defaulting to black. But then On the inputs, I'm using valid and invalid. So valid and invalid mean these trigger as soon as the page loads. So here, if it's valid, then I'm setting the border on email to green. If it's invalid, then the border is set to red. How's that validation happening? Well, there's no JavaScript involved here. I'm just using required and a minimum length. So as soon as I go beyond, then it's valid then. And similarly, if I just leave it as a single character, then that's not valid. The other thing here is that then on the outer one, I'm doing ampersand has. So I'm using the has selector. This looks for a child element that is user valid or user invalid. So when I just have this initial, user valid only hits when you go into a field. So there, now that's valid. Again, user valid and user invalid don't pick up based upon, you have to have content in there. So you can't just go into a field and tab out, then it won't run the user valid or user invalid. It has to have content in there. But as I put that in, then the whole border goes red. And if I put an invalid email address in there, then it goes red, otherwise goes green. So that's very useful there. The container queries, if I go across to our form here and look at the form CSS, then we've got container, the outer element of container here has container form new / inline size. So this allows us to set different settings depending upon various properties. Form new, so by default, then it just uses the settings on the element itself. We use a container query to map to this first element, this first label, form new. So we set at container form new, and then it uses inline size for working out that whether to use that or not. So when form new has a width whose inline size is less than 1,000, then it will switch to grid template columns and background color red. So by default, then we've got display grid and grid template columns 101 FR on. So that means that the form here is looking at the elements in each section and looking and using the first as 100 pixels, the input then as 1 FR. If I then come, if I reduce it down, then it's going to be grid template columns. So it will, at the moment, at the moment the 101 FR is on input group. I'm using grid template columns as repeat and 500 pixels. As I come down below 1,000 pixels, then it becomes a single grid template column. So each element, each child is a separate row in there, and sets the background color, and manipulates the layout there. So whereas we used media queries before, now we're just using a container query and applying that automatically based upon the width of the page. So that's a much more useful way of doing it. As I say, some of these are newer than others, and webstatus.dev is the place to look at that. Here's just a screenshot of it, but things are organized into baseline years. So this is the year when that became baseline. That means that that's a particular year where all the browsers had fully implemented a particular piece of functionality. So you can, if you have an understanding of the browsers that you're targeting and your customer base, you can choose which functionality you use or don't use based upon the baseline year. So it's well worth being aware of that. Each year, the browser manufacturers focus on particular things, and this is where the interop, and whichever year it is, dashboard comes in. So you can look at what's stable, what's experimental, out of the things that they've agreed across them, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and Safari, that they've agreed across them to be working on that particular year. And this year, look particularly at View Transition API and CSS anchor positioning. They are particularly useful new features that are going to be worked on this year.
CSP stands for Content Security Policy. This is typically a value that is set in the HTTP header or as a meta tag. I haven't seen it as a meta tag used for a while, but in theory you could do that. The content security policy is used to specify what content your HTML page can load from where. So whether it's CSS or whether it's connecting to a different host to load JSON or JavaScript. This is all how you specify it. It's quite a pain in the proverbial to get it right. Well, we're going to see that. A little reminder, if you implement CSS, it wants you to separate JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. You can go and add that to your Express.js. You can add it to your Nginx. So if your application doesn't do that, you can always use a proxy to enforce that. You also have a possibility to switch on very strict CSP, but have the mercy switch on, which says only report it back to me. So you then can step by step implement the real tight policy. So, and we had this before. What you should definitely not do is allow unsafe inline. So if you used to, like, say, a button on click is do something, that's a bad idea. You don't want to do this, because that opens you up to cross-site scripting and command injection events. And okay, I'll show you an example. So again, you got the source code in the repository. This is a very simple page, but let's say here it loads an icon from Font Awesome. Here it loads the background from what's that called, Pixam photos, and I'm currently using the easy content security policies. That the default source is only self. That means from the same host as the page was loaded, but the image source can be pixum and pixum photos. And the style I allow unsafe inline, and the Cloudflare content development and the fonts are also from Cloudflare. And I said, okay, I'm going to go and make this a little bit tighter. So the same page, but now you see on the right hand side, I said, whoa. I refuse to load the style sheet from the Cloudflare content delivery network. I couldn't apply inline styles, so it starts looking different. Or when I said I allow unsafe inlines as a default, a switch, and it doesn't load the background image, and it sends a hello from a script tag because I allowed unsafe inline. And I said I want to go strict, and then I said, yeah, I get the page initialized because that's the index.js, but the hello from inside the page is not loading it. So you have very clear control over what is loaded, what is it. I'm a big fan of strict default self. In the REST API, in the admin UI, we are pretty strict with the content security policy. But one thing is clear: if you want to get it right, you need to have proper tooling. And there's two things which I want to highlight. One is there is a report URI that helps you to generate. I said, okay, connect source. That's the place where I want to go and load data. I said, okay, so it's HTTPS. I can't type my data. And I said, scripts, I only want to have self, and font sources, I want to send them as data. And then when I say generate policy, it will then go and show me, oops, if it's working, it would show me the, sometimes you have to try twice. So, okay, doesn't like me today. It would go and...
Stephan, you have a typo in your connect source.
Oh,
My data. DATA.
okay. Okay. So it actually goes out and checks. So I'm going to go and take this out and set self and generate policy. And it has a report URI sometimes has a little bit in. Anyway, so you can use it to a little bit of generate. On the second one is the CSP evaluator. So you have a content security policy. You paste it in there, and it tells you what is okay and what is not okay. Also, script source is quite, let's say, HTTPS, anything G-static, ouch. So, and my personal little favorite is when you go there, you can specify which form actions go, so nobody can go and hijack your form and point it to a different server. And the very big one is the report to and the report UI, where you can set, okay, any content security policy violation gets reported to an endpoint you specify. Doesn't need to be the same server. Can be a central repository. There's even third-party services that say we do that for you and send you regular updates. And one of the nice little things is with the report to functionality, you can say, okay, I make my content security policy tight, but I set report factor report only, so you it still would load everything as if you wouldn't have a content security policy. And but send you the report, so you have a fighting chance to update your code with content security compliant code. Yo. And off to the next example. Customizable select. That's my big favorite, but that's Paul's to explain.
Yep. So let me share my screen. So customizable select, I demoed this at Engage a few weeks ago. A week later, Google I/O happened, and they demoed it as well. So it's good to know that I'm on board with this. This is it's currently in WhatWG stage 3, so it's kind of been pretty much finalized now. It's just a case of waiting for other browser vendors to implement it. It's supported in Chrome, Edge, Chrome and Opera for Android, not yet in Firefox, Safari or iOS. But this is basically a select on steroids. So here it is. And first, let's see it in here. So we've, instead of just your normal select, which just has a drop down, then we can get some more rich functionality in there. So it basically makes the contents of your select area, your options, into more than just a value. So the option becomes a slot, and slots, if you've started looking at web components, that's a key area in there. It allows you to inject content in. So the options, the default one doesn't have much in it. Let's pick up the notes one. So image has a source of where to load the image from and a div, and this then allows you to build that really flexible layout here. You'll notice that the div here has selected description and description. These are just, I've just got CSS on them. So selected description is set to display none. Description is set to display and with a color. The button bit is where the selected stuff gets injected. So it basically takes the div of, or takes the contents of whichever option is selected and injects it up here. And what that means is that with the selected description on my CSS, I can say for if it's a selected content, if the selected description is in selected content, then display as block. Otherwise, down here it's set to display none, and the description is set to display none, whereas it's set to display here. So you can manipulate the coloring. The nice thing about this is it gracefully degrades. Now this kind of looks a slightly bit more messy because I've got a div in there and lots of content, so it's basically putting the whole of that content in there. But it means that it still works on browsers that don't support it yet. The final bit is I'm going to go to my network on here and set to offline. Now this is a server that's over in the United States somewhere. I'm in the UK, and now if I do a hard refresh, no internet, but then it still loads. How's this done? Well, this is service workers. So we've got a service worker here, and service workers allow you to load resources and tell it to and cache them in the browser so that the browser can pull from the cache when the network is not available. So service workers have been standard in PWAs for a very long time. but they are also supported in all browsers now. You don't have local storage available when the service worker is initially loading, but you do have IndexedDB. And there are some limitations. You can only run it via HTTPS, so that's why I'm not running this demo locally. There are options for running HTTPS locally, so if you're using Vite and the Vite plugin mkcert plugin, then you can create certs locally and run those, or ngrok as well as another one. But it allows you, there's a bit of a life cycle to it. So you register the service worker, and there's a life cycle to that: installing, waiting, and active. You add an event listener for install, and there's some playing about there with event.waitUntil. So we want to add the resources to the cache, and we want to try that first, and if not, then pull from the cache. The activate uses navigation preload, and then the fetch is what we use when it's actually running to respond with cache first, and we've got the code there that you can dig into. Decision cheat sheet. Do you want to cover this quickly, Stephan? Or should we go straight to questions?
Sure. Just go on to show the slide. So while the standards and the base has greatly evolved, you should make sure that you give all the parts proper thought. So what's your environment, what's your logic, what's the skill in your team, what APIs you talk to, and then based on then pick the right environment. If you're not sure about it, Discord is a good place to ask questions and to discuss it, because very often different angles of views give you a better idea. Next. So just to clarify terminology, so very often you hear web development, oh, I need a framework. Well, we just saw eventually components is what is sufficient, like say WebASM or Shoelace or Polymer or the likes. And what you definitely should have a look at is having the right tooling. So I use Vite, French for fast, and a few more to guide my development, to make sure that things work out nicely. Okay, next. And like I say, you want to build a complex application and have a consistent style. You want to have a look at your storybook to document and use that very well. Okay, next. So the big question to ponder: where to keep state. And Axios is not a hate speech. It says HTML as the origin of state. So do I want to keep it in JavaScript like with Zustand or Redux, or am I good to store my application state, the client-side state, in properties in HTML? And then of course it's always a good idea to say, do I have enough willpower to run with an exotic one, or do I do what the majority does simply because there's a bigger knowledge base available? Okay, off to the questions.
All right, Paul, I'll let you keep your screen up there while we go through it. We've just got one so far, so I'll encourage people to pop your questions in. I've got a couple in mind as well. But yeah, send us the questions. That was really good, guys. Thank you, and certainly a sprint. lots of detail there. First one was just more of a tooling question for Stephan. Have you checked out Live View and their way of developing apps?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. One of my questions is kind of the classic situation that we have today, where our friends at Microsoft are, investing a huge amount in AI to generate code. And of course, a lot of the AI tools are slightly older than the bleeding edge, but I'm curious your experiences in how AI is either a help or a hindrance, kind of based on all the material that you just presented.
I can jump in a bit there. It's you need to bear in mind that AI may not be fully up to date.
Yeah.
So I did ask about light dark late last year, and its knowledge was a little bit out of date. You need to be aware of how recent its knowledge is, and you may need to point it towards particular things. If you're using it for framework development, again, take that into account. If a framework has changed recently, then it may not be up to date with the latest way of doing things, the latest APIs. And any use of AI requires an intelligent person sitting at the keyboard. If your questions are badly phrased, or you're trying to ask it to do too much at once, then it's not going to be fully up to date. It's not going to give you the best answers because of the input that it's getting. There is tooling being added to VS Code, I believe, to track on what's being used based upon a baseline year. So you can specify a baseline year, and it will tell you whether you're using stuff that's more recent than that or not. I think that was mentioned on the Google I/O webinars. So check into that as well.
Yeah, it just seems to me that front end stuff is changing faster than AI can keep up with. You can, for example, if you want some kind of a sort routine or something like that, that's more business logic, AI might be more appropriate. But for doing front end stuff, it just seems like things are changing so fast that AI is not going to be able to give you the right answer.
The videos automatically get pulled into the developer community in the blogs area as well.
Absolutely. Yep. Be available all over the place. Good stuff, fellas. We'll let you go. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing what you got there. So with that, I'll wish everybody else a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.